Okay, so I realized while I was doing a quick and dirty edit of the last video that my camera had drifted. um, so the talk I had about proprioception and practicing intervals may have gotten lost a little, so I'll start here before I read this one with kind of talking about that. In the last piece, I had a spot where I had to jump from some sort of a C chord down to a D. It was a C shallow, some sort, something like that, down to a D. Oh, it was an arpeggio. Okay, so I was making mistakes and making that jump blindly, and talking about how, if I'm reading along like that, and I'm paying good attention to my reading, I give myself a little time to find that by really thinking about where it's at. But for somebody who's not really good at that at all, they might wonder, how do you find that? It's a completely blind leap. So, I do that by mostly feeling the topography. So if I'm jumping down to an E from the C, got my pinky here, it's easy to feel this E flat, and I can kind of find that E. So over time, I get better at finding those notes. At some point, I'm not really feeling for the E flat. I've trained myself to know exactly where that's at. But in order to stop myself from cheating and using my eyes, I try to feel it out. There are other tricks, but I'm not going to get into them right here. And so, you can still kind of feel, once you're passable at this, you can sort of feel where that D's at. That's between some black keys, but I'll get in the neighborhood and I can kind of feel these black keys around it and find it. And then I rely on that less and less. So what I was saying about how to practice this efficiently would be to do it in multiple keys. So I'd do it in C, a couple of times, but I might do it in F. And that's not right. That's all the way down the octave. Yeah, no, it's okay. And you see, I'm having more trouble with that, which I'll get into in here in a second. I might do an F sharp. So the way that I'm approaching that, it kind of, I like to say, it kills three birds with one stone, because really you're practicing the technical part. But you're also practicing thinking about how to transpose in other keys. That makes you really aware of how to spell chords in those keys. So in the case of C, I'm thinking of it as I've got this 1, 5, 1 in C, 1, and then I'm jumping down to the 2 relative to the chord C. And then it'll be the same thing in F sharp, 1, 5, 1. And I've got to think, what is the note? What is the 2 for that F sharp? And it's G sharp. So you get better at thinking about that, which is really practical. So you've got the technical work and the really practical work. And one of the reasons I would recommend doing this, it works for me because for a musician, you need to be able to play in every key. And the better that you can feel every key rather than just one key, the better shape you'll be in. But the intervals are more or less the same. All the keys start to feel the same. But I was mentioning there's a study where they had people, I think non-musicians, the goal was to train to get good at doing a specific interval. So in one group, they had them do something like this, where they were just picking out one interval and practicing it, getting really good at that one interval. The other group was doing all kinds of random stuff, and they were practicing lots of different intervals. And sometimes they were practicing that one interval, but a lot of times they were practicing different intervals. And in the end, the surprising thing is that the people who had spent all their time practicing on this fell behind on actually executing this compared to the people who are doing all kinds of random stuff. So you actually will get better at it, sort of mapping the keys, by playing it in more than one place. And that sort of comes back, as a musician, it actually matters to you because It's not just random notes that you're hitting. It's actually things in different keys. And so I was talking a little bit about, the other big thing is that it helps with your proprioception, and or rather how your proprioception and your spatial awareness interact with one another. Your proprioception is really just your awareness of parts of your body relative to your body. Normally you'll sit in one place relative to the keyboard, and things are where they are. So if I practice that in C, I get really good at feeling that right here in this spot. But if I go to practice in F, it's different. It's the exact same distance spatially on the keyboard, and it's still white keys, but proprioception-wise to my body, it's in a different place. And so I'll be less accurate doing the same thing. And that is the case. I have more trouble. My picture gets fuzzier the further out I get from the center of the keyboard, because this is where I spend most of my time. And then out here, I spend less time. Just practically, music is not written out here as much. So I'm a little blinder out there, and I'm more likely to make mistakes. But that can even happen close in, because you're not used to maybe going between some black keys, like if you're doing an F sharp or in D flat. So it's it's worth practicing it in all the keys, for all kinds of good reasons. Anyway, so I'm going to carry on and read this next tune. Okay, that was a pretty easy read. Honestly, I found myself spacing out just a little bit on that. Because bumbling around the back of my head, I guess one thing to say about the point of being able to find these things blindly is that people think it's no big deal to look down and find your hands. But when you're reading and you're reading ahead, every split second matters. And when you disrupt that, that's input that you're not getting. If you're a really good reader and you're able to read very many bars ahead, you leave yourself a little more room to get away with it. But that will still end up being, it'll be the point that ends up being the bottleneck for you. So as music gets really fast and has jumps that you need to look at, now you can't sight read it. There are tricks to overcome that, and people do that. But if you really just want to improve, you should try to get to where you don't have to look at your hands at all. That's the goal. It's obviously not a reality, even for me, not even close. But I do try to work on it. More on that in a second. I'm going to read through this again. Yeah, there are a couple of spots in there. It's always when I have the larger than a tenth or a tenth or more intervals, and I have to split my hands. That always messes me up a little. Just a little slower at that. But yeah, it's a really good. It's good to practice being able to not look. And the thing is, people want to start with some crazy stride pattern. That's not the way to go. It starts with just being aware of like really simple 5-finger stuff, because it's amazing how much people rely on looking at their hands for stuff that doesn't matter. There's a video on YouTube that irritates me to no end, and people post it all the time on Reddit. And it's they put this eye tracking software on some piano professor from New York, I think, and they're trying to basically gauge like, what does a professional pianist's eyes do when they're sight reading or playing the piano? So they had him just playing something, and then they had him playing the piano, sight reading, and one of his students, and they're kind of comparing that. Now, when he's playing this very impressive piece that has all these big jumps, I guess the big takeaway is that he's looking where his hand's going to go, not where his hand is, which that is useful information. It also helps you understand things about sight reading. But then when he's sight reading a freaking hymn, and he's just up and down and up and down and up and down with the eye tracking. And I'm just like, I work with, ladies who have a fraction of his skill who never look at their hands. They just don't have to. It's embarrassing that he needs to look at his hands to play a hymn. And I think that's mostly because in his position, professors who teach classical piano tend to be focused very much on memorization of repertoire, very difficult repertoire, and they're probably passable readers, and they can get away with looking up and down. But it's not really his job. Now, I would argue it's his job to teach his students to do that, because they're not going to be playing this classical repertoire for a living. They're most likely going to be sight reading to keep their head above water with any gigs they do. But no, people, think that that's an accurate representation. And I always point out like old Tom Breyer videos. Watch that. I mean, that guy's doing crazy stride stuff and improvising, and he's sight reading it, and he never looks at his hands. He just doesn't. He knows exactly where that's at. How can he read very fast ragtime pieces with huge leaps? Because he's not looking at his hands. He knows what he's doing. So, just because some people are like, it's too hard. Well, nothing's easy when you start, and you just have to work at it. So that's my rant over. I'll read this one more time. That's way too fast. The song is not that quick. Really interesting to see exactly where I can't keep up and then where I can. And it suddenly rubber bands back. Anyway, I'm going to move on.